Meet expert. And we have our first show. Honored to have to Mr. Don Cinelli. Don Cinelli, you're very, as you call it in the crowd space, and for the last couple of years. And welcome to our crowdfunding Meet Crowdfunders Silicon Valley special.
Thank you, Sydney. I look forward to chatting.
I know that. Thank you. Well, listen, let's get to the kind of a week. We're going to be doing this show, and it's a kind of week in the review. And it's a lot happening since in the crowdfunding space. We're going to be doing the week in review. Hopefully, will be a time slot on Sunday for our audience in the CrowdFundBeat. And so there's a lot of things that are happening basically, and in the crowd space. And just today, and we heard of another 31 million to this real estate and crowdfunding, and with all this hype about peer-to-peer crowdfunding, now real estate. Tell me about your observation. What do you know? Let us know what's going on.
Well, I think it's all good for the industry. I think that some of the platforms who have successfully executed, they're gaining traction. They're actually pulling together investor capital and deploying it in various types of projects. Real estate is one of the hot areas, as you and I have talked about. Excuse me. It's one of the hot areas that capital is finding its way to, and a number of the platforms. Certainly Realty Mogul. Canaan invested $9 million in Jillian and her great effort, and then you've got Fundrise. The Millers picked up $31 million, and there's a number of other platforms that are successfully raising capital. Above and beyond just real estate. There's been a lot of the equity-based platforms that too have attracted the interest of the venture community, the private equity community. How it fares. I've got a series of opinions, as I typically do. And we can certainly go
into that. You do, Mr. Cinelli. And we want to have some of those. We want to get to that, some of this opinion. But who puts the money in these people? I mean, 9 million. Is this? Where did the money come from? Is this hedge fund managers? Are the big boys that are getting to this game, or big girls for that matter? Are the people that they see this crowdfunding as a financial product? What's going on? Where the money come from?
Well, I think it's you've got a couple things going on. You have with the successes of the Kickstarters and the Indiegogos, the Angel List, I think the institutional community, the institutional investor community, which would include large-scale investors, private equity firms, venture capital firms, they see a legitimacy of the business models and are willing to support these platforms. I believe Canaan Ventures, one of the top investors in the one of the top venture capital firms. They invested in Realty Mogul, and they led the $9 million round. But they've also been an investor in, I believe it's either Prosper or Lending Club. So they've been in the peer-to-peer space, and they've made investments in various other platforms. So who's investing? The venture community is now interested in this space. You've got, in the case of Fundrise, I believe you had a couple venture firms, but primarily institutional real estate investors who see this as a new avenue to create capital channels for them. So I think the legitimacy of distributed finance using technology to avail investors on a broad basis is finding its place in the capital markets.
Yeah, I was just checking that. By the way, we are for our audience. They can go and question they have from Steve or from me in this show and in future show at the CrowdFundBeat at Twitter, the hashtag, the sort of CrowdFundBeat, and the hashtag crowdfunding USA that we have, or crowdfunding. Steve, this is very interesting, and that we see a lot of players are coming to the market, and so the real estate works. We know peer-to-peer works. It was they've been doing it. People like Prosper and Lending Club, and now newcomers with the vertical market would be a peer-to-peer for the real estate or peer-to-peer for financing cars. So it's a lot of players are coming with a different platform on a vertical market. So this is very interesting. And what's going on? I mean, this is just what are we waiting for? What is the next big thing is going to happen? What do you see it going forward? I mean, you have some news on that. Tell us about it.
Well, I think there's a variety of things going on. I may dismiss the fact that this is a new way of raising funds because, as you well know, my background, I was a co-founder of Off-Road Capital back in '99, and we had a private capital market. We had aggregated about 12,000 investors worldwide, and we're raising money online through Reg D offerings and can raise $3 to $20 million for a company, in a matter of a week. So really efficient capital formation. It was a market structure as opposed to just a sort of a bulletin board, discussion group. And so we did that, back in '99 to 2002. So what's that? 12 years ago. We were certainly, sort of leading the pack, and that company was sold. I guess there's, as I said before, the interest in social media, the successes that Kickstarter and Indiegogo and Rocket have had in the perk-based crowdfunding, certainly led by companies like Kiva. Kiva was one of the first crowdfunding platforms for small loans to indigent areas of the world. So I think the use of technology to broaden an investor, a sponsor group's reach or an investor group's reach will continue. The platforms that we talk about here are nascent platforms, and they're independent and they're autonomous. And I think you asked where the trends are. I know a number of the big sponsor groups that manage a lot of money, whether it's in real estate, whether it's in other types of asset classes, whether it's private equity or whatnot, are actually looking at their own internal crowd platforms or building internal crowd platforms, such as the KKR, the Colbert, Kravis and Roberts, the Carlyles, the Blackstones. A lot of the big fund managers, they're looking at developing their own crowd platform. So rather than accessing just large institutional commitments for their direct investing activities, they'll be looking at smaller investors coming in, and to efficiently and economically attract those investors, they can use a crowd mechanism to build up additional capital commitments. So I think it will become more institutionalized. I think you'll see mutual fund companies go into the crowd. You'll see other providers of investment products going to the crowd. So I think we're in the first inning of a longer game to be played.
Speaking of inning and a game to play, it's a lot of games has been played. I mean, we see the money is flowing right now, but in the meantime, the SEC hasn't passed the title. I mean, they finish all those timing, and proposed rules and other things, but it still is a dragon. They sound like it's nothing happening, and for the real Title III. And so, you think we just going towards the 506C? That's just happening, or Reg D has been in the past couple of years, and people just finding this platform or crowdfunding, depends, finding their own crowd, finding their own tribe, and doing this as a mechanism for a financial product. Do you think that's happening? I mean, are we going to see any Title III?
Well,
what is the word out there?
Yeah, the Reg D stuff has been done. We did Reg D 506C deals back 12 years ago, so that really didn't change. The difference.
Is this the same Reg D that was? So Reg D has been around for a long time.
Well, Reg D really was instituted in 1982, I believe. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, under the 1930, the Securities Act of 1933, I think it was called Rule 127 or 129, something like this. My memory may not serve me right, but it was really a provision within the Securities Act to enable smaller companies to raise capital through well-to-do investors and not disclose the same level of minute detail, which is a costly proposition. So if in fact you sold to well-to-do investors, which were called accredited, you didn't have to disclose as much. It was a expedient way to raise capital to people that could afford to lose money. 1982 was actually when they defined what constituted an accredited investor, namely having a minimum net worth level, having minimum income levels. And it's interesting that with the exception of the exclusion of one's home equity, the equity in a personal residence, the Reg D definition has not changed for, what is it, 30 years. And so it's interesting when you think about income levels of $200,000 as an individual, $300,000 as a couple, $1 million of net worth in 1982 terms is much different than in 2014 terms. So there's a lot more so-called accredited investors now. But anyway, to go back to your point, the Reg D or the Jobs Act, changed a couple things. Heretofore, you couldn't publicize an offering, that is general solicitation. That in Title II was approved, and so what you'll see is more institutions probably going broader and not having a pre-existing relationship with an investor and being able to solicit them for new investment, again, accrediteds, QIBs, and whatnot. But there's an onus placed on those accredited investors, or rather those institutions that are generally soliciting accredited investors, as opposed to the self-accreditation that had been the practice for so long. And so the general solicitation changes certain things. Certainly under the Jobs Act, they raised the limit on Reg A public offerings to Reg A plus. So instead of putting a limit on at $5 million, they raised that to $50 million. And I know a number of smaller companies, including many financial institutions, are looking at Reg A plus offerings to get into the market and pull in public capital. When it comes to Title III, I find it.
What is it? What is your real opinion about the Title III, Steve? You've been from the financial background, you've been in this thing, you've been in banker, you see all those things happening. What is your thought about this? Is it just about $1 million proposed rules, for a startup? What are you gonna do with it?
Well, first of all, I think the SEC and FINRA came in and put together I think it's 587 pages of thought into the how is Title III going to be promulgated, how it's going to be practiced, how it's going to be rolled out. I think many of the requirements in terms of financial statement audits, reviews become problematic because the cost of doing those for early stage companies, it's a bit costly. The legal requirements, the disclosure requirements. So I think the SEC, in their wisdom, certainly wants to protect the investor in terms of these early stage situations and make sure proper disclosure. That's assuming that there is a high degree of financial literacy. It's interesting, the SEC and regulators, and certainly in well, let me not divert.
Tell us what really you
one of the
tell us what you really think.
Being able to sell early stage company securities or private securities to non-accredited investors. Yeah, the SEC wants to protect them protect them.
I'm all for it. I'm all for it. I mean, I'm all for it.
Losses and this and that, but it's interesting because if you put limitations of $5,000 or $10,000 or some percentage of your net worth, you think the SEC is looking out for you. But for other activities that people deploy capital, and I don't think this is brought up enough, is that anybody, independent of whether they're accredited or not, can go to Las Vegas or Reno and play the crap tables and spend as much money as they want. Someone's not looking at. There's not a big brother saying, hey Sydney, you can only spend $1,000 at the crap table or the blackjack table. You could expend your entire net worth if you were, if you're so disposed. Same thing going with, spending money on a, extravagant vacation when your budget doesn't allow for that. So there's a lot of, it's in some ways it's.
We're running up a little bit of out of time, Steve. Here, and we have a couple of questions from the audience, and we want to have you in the future to do some of these hangout and CrowdFunding Meet CrowdFunding you're going to be hosting, and we're very thankful for that. And we have a question. He said from one of our here Julian Herring. He's a PhD. He said, thanks for the show. But what is next? What is all about? Is the crowdfunding dead on arrival? Are they? A lot of people that are looking to this Title III. They're looking for that Title IV. I mean, that's a question. What is your opinion?
I think that, as I said, we're in the early stages of the applications of distributed finance. That's how I sort of consider crowdfunding. The business of finance is really telling stories, basically exchange, information between, a user of capital with a provider of capital, and technology enables you to do that, quicker, faster, broader, internationally. And I think that the use of technology and social media to attract the attention of capital providers for particular purposes will continue, and it's in the, as I said, it's in the early stages, but you'll see crowd platforms, becoming more vertical. You'll see institutional investors using technology to raise small sums of funds. You'll see changes in the banking industry, on how loans are made between banks. You'll see cross-border transactions. I think Kickstarter is now in, just about every country in the world. So they're doing a lot of both local finance, but a lot of cross-border finance. They're democratizing the capital formation space, which is absolutely fabulous. So I think technology is a great equalizer. It democratizes capital formations. For so many years, angel investing and investing in early stage companies was very local, and you'd have local investors looking at local companies close to them. Well, now people in North Carolina can invest in Silicon Valley companies, and a lot of cross-border activity. So I actually think that there'll be other applications, and probably more sophisticated applications of financing. The thing that I'm most interested in is the comparison of the crowdfunding platforms with the investment banking industry, because that's what investment banks do. They serve as agents to raise capital on behalf of companies. Some use technology more than others, but the one thing at the end of the day is investment banks, they build a reputation by getting deals done, and also the success of those deals in the aftermarket. And I think down the road what you'll see is a review of the investment opportunities that are provided by the crowdfunding platforms. How many of them actually get funded? What's the batting average of these platforms to get deals done? And then secondarily, and more importantly, how well those deals do at the end of the day. There's not enough talk about these young companies. How do they get monetized? How do they get liquid? How do the investors get out? There's been nascent conversations about secondary markets, and certainly that's one of the areas near and dear to me.
And that's, not to interrupt, Steve, that the secondary market is a big issue. A lot of people, they don't see it as an exit. They're kind of their concern is, it's like, unlike real estate, another thing, I don't see that in startup world there will be that much of a quick exit. It's still that's a concern. But well, that's, you have anything to add up on that? I think we're going to have this show, we're going to have the opportunity.
Yeah, real estate's a little different because most of the real estate platforms out there are using sort of self-liquidating investment structures, namely loans, or the sponsor of the deals that have raised money on an equity basis have a specific investment horizon, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, to basically roll out or sell the property. When it comes to a lot of these smaller businesses that really the Jobs Act was intended to fund, those are not necessarily the next Googles or the next Twitters, but small business, small to medium-sized enterprises that the banks haven't lent as much as maybe they should, or maybe they're just risk averse. And so bringing a new form of capital, which is the aggregated capital of the crowd, into small business is great. But a lot of these small businesses, and this is one of my concerns, these are not businesses that are necessarily potential IPOs, and they're not necessarily companies that will be sold to a bigger buyer. These are lifestyle businesses. These are entrepreneurs. These are individual small business owners that are building their own business. And how does a passive investor get out of the investment at the end of the day? Because investors, as you know, are mere renters of money. They're putting money in. They want their money back at some sort of return. And so the whole concept of whether deal structures are self-liquidating, whether there's a lot of conversation to be had. Yeah. And again, it's still
I'm sure we're going to talk about it in the next program. We're running up, but we're definitely running out of the time. We appreciate you. Appreciate you going to be doing this show and with us basically, and that's going to be good. And then for audience at home in the CrowdFundBeat media group, we have all this great video. We have conference in the Silicon Valley Beat crowdfunders. We had conference Crowdfunding USA. We have all these panels, all the experts, including Steve, and we're going to be interviewed in one-on-one, and we have it in our network of our CrowdFundBeat, and there's a lot of data, there's a lot of articles, a lot of good video. We invite you to visit www.crowdfundbeat, and there's a link in this YouTube channel. And so we thank you. Steve, thank you for joining the first time of our CrowdFundBeat one-on-one with crowdfunders.
Well, my pleasure, and I look forward to further episodes.
All right. Yeah, you're going to be doing some of those episodes and have those questions that you know how to ask, and we will be honest with them. Well, thank you very much, and we hope you enjoyed our first show, and looking forward to another show with you. This is Sidney Armani saying so long.